This is a News 12 Long Island Vote 2012 election debate.
Hello everyone and welcome to this Island Vote 2012 election special. I'm Jill Wagner. For the next half hour, we'll be talking with the candidates running for the 3rd Congressional District. The district covers the North Shore of Long Island, stretching across both counties into parts of Queens. It includes the townships of Huntington, Oyster Bay, North Hempstead, and the city of Glen Cove. Now let's meet the candidates. The incumbent, Steve Israel of Dix Hills, is running on the Democratic, Working Families, and Independence lines. He is the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Israel was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2001. The challenger, Stephen Labate of Deer Park, is running on the Republican, Conservative, and Tax Revolt lines. Labate is an active member of the U.S. Army Reserve and holds the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Labate also has a career in financial services. Welcome to News 12 Long Island, gentlemen.
Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Before we begin, here are the rules and format of this debate. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. Each will have up to a minute and a half to answer each question, and then 30 seconds for rebuttal when needed. At the end of the debate, candidates will have 1 minute for closing statements. We start now with opening statements. Speaking order was decided by lot prior to the show, and we begin with Stephen Labate.
First off, I just want to thank News 12 for hosting this debate today. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Stephen Labate, and I'm running for the United States Congress here in the 3rd Congressional District. I'd like to introduce myself to you a little bit. First, I've been serving my country, our country, for the past 24 years as an officer in the United States Army as well as in the Army Reserve. I've achieved the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and I've been called to active duty 3 times since the attacks on 9/11, to include tours in Iraq as well as the Pentagon. I'm choosing right now to serve my country, except in another way, in the halls of the United States Congress. I'm running for Congress because I have twin 6-year-old children, and quite frankly, I'm frightened for their future. I'm frightened the future for millions of American children all across the country who are right now being straddled by millions and millions of dollars of debt due to the incredible amount of spending, the outlandish spending of my opponent as well as the current administration. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a change in leadership in this country. A change in leadership because our children and grandchildren, they deserve better. I've never held elected office before. I'm not a lawyer. But what I am is I'm a soldier and I'm a dad. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Congressman Israel, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. This election is about how we restore the middle class. The New York Times said that I'm a Democrat who's long focused attention on the plight of the middle class, and Newsday recently said that I'm a ferocious fighter on the causes I trumpet. I choose those fights because of my upbringing. I grew up in a Levitt house. My dad was a traveling salesman. My mom started a typing service in our house to make extra money. When it was time for me to go to college, we agreed that I would go to Nassau Community College and save up some money and then go to a 4-year institution. That's why I'm fighting to pass my bill that would allow middle-class families to set up savings accounts for their education with pre-tax dollars. It's why I strongly disagree with the Obama administration when they say $250,000 makes you rich. It may make you rich in Louisiana, but not Long Island. It's why I've been fighting against Paul Ryan's plan to end Medicare in order to fund tax cuts for middle-class families. I have helped pass $917 billion in spending cuts, but I will not balance the budget on the backs of the middle class and seniors. I've always fought those fights for the middle class, and I'll continue to do that if I'm reelected.
Okay, great. Now let's begin with some questions. Congressman, one thing you've mentioned in your opening statement, you say you're fighting to change the tax code to better reflect the high cost of living on Long Island. So you say $250,000 is not what you would define as rich. What would you define as rich on Long Island? And how do you get congressmen and women from across the country to go along with this when the federal government needs the money?
Well, this is a fight that I've had on both sides of the aisle, and it's a fight I've had with the Obama administration. Look, I understand we've got to balance our budgets, and I've already supported $917 billion in spending cuts. But we've got to balance it in a way that is fair to the middle class. Now, when an arbitrary figure is taken, that $250,000 makes you rich, again, it may make you rich in some areas of the country, but it does not make you rich on Long Island, not when you're paying the highest property taxes, the highest gas prices, the highest cost of living in the country. And so I have a common sense idea that I've been promoting in Congress, and it's very simple. Instead of taxing people based on what they earn, we ought to tax people based on what they earn, but factor in the cost of living, index it to inflation, index it to the specific cost of living. Now, that's just pure common sense, and I will continue to fight for that common sense reform of the tax code to provide tax relief and tax stability on Long Island for as long as I'm in Congress.
Okay, and same question. Well, it's same variation of the question. I mean, what do you think can be done to ensure Long Islanders get a fair break when it comes to taxes, especially when the cost of living is so high here?
Well, yes, the cost of living is very high on Long Island. Basically, Long Islanders are leaving this area in droves because of the incredible amount of taxation as well as the regulations we have. What we have to do is we have to reduce taxes here on Long Island. We have to reduce taxes across the country. Right now, Long Islanders are suffering. Our small business owners are suffering. Now, I understand my opponent put forth a bill in Congress, but quite frankly, it's a typical ploy where every single election cycle we put forth bills before the halls of Congress. 215 bills that were put forth by my opponent in his 12 years in Congress, only two have actually passed into law.
Well, that's not true.
That is true. But the reality is what we need are common sense, bipartisan solutions. We don't need partisan bickering. And I want to go to Congress so I can work together with both sides of the aisle and make things happen and make things work.
Congressman, would you like to respond?
Well, Mr. Lebate is just uninformed. First of all, if you want to ask people what I've been able to accomplish for them, go to the workers right now who are working on road improvements on Route 110, Pine Lawn Road, road improvements that are necessary to bring the Cannon Corporation to locate on Long Island and create jobs here. Those road improvements were funded through my initiatives. Go to the people who are living near the Long Island Sound who are benefiting from the passage of the Long Island Sound Stewardship Act, which I passed under a Republican president to create record-breaking federal investments in Long Island Sound environmental preservation, not just for the environment, but because it's good for our property values and to stabilize our property taxes. And ask the veterans that I've represented, $6 million in back pay for the veterans that I've represented. So ask veterans, ask homeowners living by the Long Island Sound, ask workers who are on the job, and they'll tell you that I've achieved what I've promised and more.
Would you like to respond?
Sure, thank you. First off, those are the same arguments that we saw in the last debate in regards to building roads at a county corporation. We have to be doing more than that, than focusing on the same successes, which that is a success, and I applaud you for that. But Long Island right now still has a substantially higher unemployment rate than the national average. Now, I appreciate it. I am a veteran. Actually, I still wear my country's uniform proudly. But there's one thing that we have to remember is that's part of your job as a member of Congress. It's not something we necessarily need to advertise. It's part of the sacred obligation that you have when you're elected to Congress to take care of our veterans. And I will do more of the same.
On the issue of tax relief, the Bush tax cuts are set to expire at the end of the year. Those would affect a lot of Long Islanders making more than $250,000 a year. What do you think? Would you vote to renew them?
I think the Bush tax cuts should be continued for people not just at $250,000, but higher, again, because the cost of living is higher in Long Island. But this really talks to what happens when you have Tea Party extremists in Congress. Mr. Lebate has said that he's an extension of the Tea Party. Look, here's why we face this fiscal cliff. There is a compromise that I supported. $3 trillion in spending cuts in order to help balance our budget. Continued tax cuts for middle-class families, at least up to $250,000, and I would go higher. But the Tea Party Congress rejected that common sense compromise, saying that they would not pass a budget that reduces spending $3 trillion if millionaires are asked to give another nickel. And so they are against a $250,000 tax cut. They are against $3 trillion in tax cuts for as long as Bill Gates and Donald Trump have to come up with more. I want tax cuts that are fair. I want a budget that is balanced, that is big, bold, and fair. And what we have now is a Tea Party Congress that has rejected fairness, that wants to balance these budgets on the backs of the middle class, that wants to end Medicare in order to fund tax cuts for millionaires, and I will oppose it every step of the way as I have before.
Would you sign the pledge, Grover Norquist's pledge, not to raise taxes under any circumstances on anyone?
Well, actually I did, because I do not believe that you can raise taxes in this kind of economic environment. What we need to is give money back to our small business owners and to Americans. Now, just to address the Congressman's point, first off, if you're accusing me perhaps of supporting balanced budgets and not spending more money than we have, if you're accusing me perhaps of wanting to cut regulations for small business owners, then you know what? I'm guilty. Guilty as charged. Now, if we taxed all the millionaires and billionaires in this country 100% for this entire year, we're reducing our federal budget deficit this year only about $700 billion. By raising taxes on the people that actually create the jobs, that's not the answer to our fiscal woes. What we need is we need to incentivize our small business owners. We need to incentivize Americans to go out there and spend and create. That's what's made our country great. It isn't name calling and being partisan and saying this person's that person or so on and so forth. We've got to get beyond that. We are who we are because of the American system we have, and we work together as a team.
A response?
Well, thank you. Look, Steve, nobody's attacking you. I just disagree with your economic policies, which I think fundamentally will hurt and undermine the middle class. Now, with respect to agreeing to a no-tax pledge at any time under any circumstances, it's worse than what you said. You signed a pledge called the Contract from America 2 years ago that promised that you would support a flat tax. A flat tax will remove every single middle-class deduction from the tax code. So you lose your deduction for mortgage interest, you lose your deduction for property taxes, you lose a child care tax credit. That kind of straitjacket economics, signing these pledges to hurt the middle class while supporting a budget that ends Medicare to fund tax cuts for millionaires, is just the wrong prescription for Long Island's middle class.
Mr. LeBate, how do you respond to that? And critics who would say that signing that pledge really takes away your ability to think independently and work for your district?
Well, I don't agree, because right now Americans and the voters and the constituents of the 3rd Congressional District are taxed too much to start with. We do not have a tax problem in this country. What we have is a spending problem, and the spending problem has come from the United States Congress. Our budget deficit has increased $5 trillion in just the past 3-4 years. Before you ever entertain any kind of a tax increase, we need to cut the budget. We need to be realistic. The government has to be able to run its budget like we do at home when we run our checkbook. We don't bring in $1,000 and then try to spend $5,000. The only people who can do that, it seems like, are in the halls of Congress, and it's got to change.
Okay, we'll have to cut there. It is time for a break. When we come back, we'll continue with the debate for the 3rd Congressional District right here on News 12 Long Island, as local news gets. Welcome back to this Island Vote 2012 election special as we continue with the debate for the 3rd Congressional District. The candidates, once again, are Democratic incumbent Steve Israel and Republican challenger Stephen LeBate. Now let's get back to some questions. Mr. LeBate, I'll give you 30 seconds. You wanted to respond to something?
Thank you. First off, in regards to what the congressman had said, I'm totally not aware of signing any pledge in regards to a flat tax. I have no idea what it is he's referring to. This is what we're talking about. What we need to do is we need to make adult decisions in this country. We can now no longer spend money we don't have. And unfortunately, in the halls of Congress, they don't balance their checkbook like we do at home. The middle class has got to be able to balance their checkbook, and so does the federal government. And for that, I just wanted to make sure that was addressed. I have no idea what it is Congressman Israel's talking about.
I do. It's one thing to sign a pledge. It's another thing to sign a pledge that you say you didn't know pledged what. You signed a pledge called Contract from America that obligated you to support a flat tax. You should read your own campaign literature.
I think you should read your own bills as well, Congressman, but the reality is that's not in any campaign literature of mine. I think we need to focus on what the issues are. These voters deserve to know what the issues are, not worrying about something that did not happen, whether it's 2 years ago or 2 days ago.
Okay, I'm going to just move on to the next issue, just because we don't have that much time. On the issue of foreign relations, I believe this was asked last night in the debate, but if Israel attacked Iran, I'll begin with you, Congressman, what should the United States do? Would you support the United States getting involved once again in a military engagement in a foreign war?
Yes. On military issues, on national security, on foreign policy, I tend to lean to the right. I have been an outspoken advocate for the state of Israel. Several years ago, Israel's ambassador to the United States came to Long Island and said that I'm one of Israel's best friends in Congress. I believe that Iran is the most serious national security threat, not only that we face, but that the Middle East faces, that the world faces. And we need a comprehensive set of tough, muscular solutions with respect to Iran. Number one, we got to make sure we're talking, because you have to talk, not just because you think talking is going to change behavior, but you want to be able to say to as many allies as we have, we tried talking. Maybe they didn't listen to us, but we tried. Secondly, you have to have clandestine and covert activities. The intelligence relationship and the military relationship between the United States and Israel, by Prime Minister Netanyahu's own words, has never been closer and deeper as it is now with respect to clandestine covert activities. Third, you need crippling economic sanctions. I passed an amendment to the State Department appropriation that said that no federal agency could do business with any company that may be in violation of the Iran Sanctions Act. That was my language. And finally, if sanctions don't work, if covert and clandestine activities don't work, if talking doesn't work, you have to keep a military option on the table. Now, I want to do everything we can to avoid that military option, but we cannot afford a nuclear-equipped Iran, which is why I have been so outspoken and helped to lead the Congress in bipartisan legislation and action to stand with the State of Israel and to crack down on Iran for its behavior.
Mr. Lebate, same question for you. If Israel attacked Iran,
Sure.
do you think the U.S. should get involved militarily?
Well, if Israel attacked Iran, I don't believe Israel requires our help, but if they did, we would be there without question. We need to support Israel as one of our closest allies, and we have to be there to support them unequivocally. Now, Iran is a threat. It is an incredible that Mr. Ahmadinejad has made it very clear that he wants to wipe Israel off the face of the map. However, my concern at this point is that the sanctions are just not working. And quite frankly, the rebels that were trying to overthrow Ahmadinejad earlier in President Obama's term, the reality is we didn't support them. And I truly do feel that if there is any kind of uprising in that country, they'll be very, very hesitant to step up to the plate as they did before, because they did not see the President of the United States or the current administration support them then. And if we didn't support them then, why would we support them in the future? Now, we will support the State of Israel. I have to admit that I'm fairly close in my views with Congressman Israel. I believe we need a robust presence in the Middle East. However, I would not necessarily jump in unless the United States was absolutely required to support Israel.
On to the issue of Afghanistan. Right now, the plan is that American troops will be out by 2014. What if at that time, and I'll begin with you, Mr. Lebate, what if at that time the generals on the ground said that we need more time? What do you think? What
Sure.
happens then?
Afghanistan is a tough, tough fight. It's a tough fight. However, I do not believe in setting timelines. Right now, the generals on the ground, we have to base the judgments upon what they feel. We do need to peel out, however. We have spent 10 years of blood, sweat, and treasure in that country, but we cannot leave it to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda to return. Now, what that means is we've got to manage our expectations. And what I mean by manage our expectations is the country is 90% illiterate. We just cannot expect them to accept a Jeffersonian-style democracy that we have here. What we require is that country to be stable enough so that we could leave the country. And our soldiers, when they come home, we have to make certain we take care of them.
Same question for you, Congressman. If in 2014 the generals say we're not ready, what do you do?
I have been to Iraq and Afghanistan 9 times. I believe that the most sacred obligation a member of Congress has is to think seriously when he votes to send Americans into harm's way. I've done that on several occasions. And I believe I have an obligation to, if I'm going to send Americans into harm's way, to make sure that they're okay and to support them every step of the way. The fact of the matter is that the drawdown in Afghanistan after now 10 years is a timeline that was developed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the generals and the commanders. It wasn't a political decision by the commander-in-chief. It was a strategy that was developed by generals and by commanders, and I think you have to listen to generals and commanders. We are reaching a point where Afghanistan has to be in charge of its own security. We cannot continue to be the babysitters for Afghanistan forever. And so I think the 2014 deadline is a good deadline. It's easy to say there should be no timelines, but if there are no timelines, that doesn't put any pressure on the Karzai government to actually get its act together and start taking charge of its own security. So I think the 2014 deadline was a smart strategy developed by our generals, by our commanders, by the commander-in-chief, and I support it.
Mr. Lebate, you wanted 30 seconds to respond?
Sure. There's no general that would say, well, you know what, we have to leave by this specific date. No general would ever want that specifically publicized. The generals, whether it's in the Pentagon or in our forward deployed assets, they would never agree with something like that. They're taking the cue from the President of the United States. and they have to support the President of the United States. We cannot lean on the generals and saying, well, that's their decision. Their decision would unequivocally, if we were leaving that date, I have no doubt they would say, well, we cannot publicize it. We have to make sure that we cannot allow the enemy, the day we leave, they're sitting on the sidelines waiting for us to leave, and then the Karzai government becomes very unstable, and after 12 years, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda returns. That cannot be allowed.
We have time for one more quick question, so
Sure.
I'll give you guys about 20 seconds to answer, and I'll start with you, Congressman. Overwhelmingly, polls show that voters want both sides to work together. So can you give us an example of just one issue that you've worked on with members of the Republicans?
Yes. The Long Island Sound Stewardship Act, which was passed in the Bush administration, where I worked with Republicans and Democrats alike as the sponsor and the author of that legislation to bring record-breaking investments to the Long Island Sound. That required that I reach across the aisle and talk to my colleagues about the importance of this federal focus on reducing property taxes, enhancing our property values, and protecting our environment. That's one among many achievements that I've had in working in a bipartisan way.
Mr. LeBate, where do you envision working together with Democrats?
Well, first off, I'd work across the aisle, whether it's a President Obama or a President Romney. That's the reason why the voters in the 3rd Congressional District would be sending me to Washington. It's not to be partisan. Now, in regards to my opponent, he's voted 95% on his party's line. Now, that's not being partisan. That's actually being very partisan. It's not bipartisan. Now, in the 24 years that I've worn my country's uniform, I understand what it takes to get the job done, and we need to work together. This is no longer Republicans versus Democrats or conservatives versus liberals. We've reached a point where it's now right versus wrong, and American people understand that. We've got to get out of this partisanship, we've got to work together, and we have to get the job done.
Okay, we are out of time. It is time now for closing statements, and we will start with Stephen LeBate.
Thank you. First, on November 6th, the voters of the 3rd Congressional District basically have a choice between two very different directions to lead the country. We can continue the big government spending ways of my opponent, which have created a situation where we have $16 trillion in debt, 23 million Americans are unemployed, and 50 million Americans are collecting food stamps. Or we can change direction and rein in this out-of-control government spending and implement true pro-growth and pro-job policies. It's time. It is time to end the policies right now which are leading our country to the point of financial ruin. And we need to get the government out of the way of our small business owners so they can do what they've always done best, which is create jobs, create wealth, and create prosperity for all Americans. We need to implement common sense solutions so as to reduce our country's national debt and to get small business owners hiring again. I ask you to send me to the United States Congress so I can be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I want to thank News 12 for the opportunity to be here today, and I ask the voters of the 3rd Congressional District for your support and your vote on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Congressman, your closing statement.
Thank you very much. You've seen a contrast in this debate and this election. Mr. LeBate supports a Ryan budget that ends Medicare in order to fund tax cuts for millionaires. He has signed every single pledge he can sign that says that no matter what the circumstances, he will never ask millionaires to do a little more. You have to bear the burden. He has said on the issues of women's choice that he is right to life and he will never compromise. He has said that the greatest single threat to Judeo-Christian values is same-sex marriage. Now, that's ideology. I've been focusing on solutions. Passed the Long Island Sound Stewardship Act. Secured $6 million in back pay for the veterans that I represent. And will continue to lead the fight against budgets that are unfair to the middle class and unfair to seniors. Newsday was right. I'm a ferocious fighter on the issues that I trumpet. I've always been a fighter when it comes to standing up for the middle class, for seniors and veterans. I will continue that if you re-elect me to Congress. Thank you.
All right, our time is up. Thank you both, and thank you for joining us. Just a reminder, Election Day is November 6th. Make sure to get out and make your vote count.